Coming up, described by his boss in leaked emails as hopeless, many stakeholders hold Matt Hancock responsible for thousands of excess COVID deaths through his policy of discharging untested patients to care homes, and hundreds more deaths for his incompetence at providing proper PPE equipment to frontline NHS staff. He also has a track record of awarding dodgy multi-million-pound contracts to his cronies and even appointing some of them to public positions funded by the taxpayer. And yet, despite all that, his resignation was because of a breach of COVID regulations? I'll tell you why I find that hard to believe. Keep watching. If you enjoy these videos, please hit the like button, subscribe and hit the bell to get notified of future videos released every Wednesday and Saturday. Professor Ferguson, an epidemiologist at Imperial College London, stood down from SAGE last May after it was revealed that his married girlfriend, Antonia Starts, had been visiting him at home in breach of COVID lockdown rules pertaining at the time. Matt Hancock joined the press pylon and went so far as to call for police action against Neil Ferguson. For this reason, a lot of people think it's karma that Hancock has been caught hypocritically in a very similar situation and are just pleased he's gone. I'm sure Boris Johnson, who said the matter was now closed even before Hancock's resignation, will now hope that everyone will just move on. But I would argue that far from being time to move on, it's actually time to take a closer look at the circumstances behind Hancock's reluctant resignation. Caroline Slowcock, who was private secretary to Margaret Thatcher, has agreed with Keir Starmer that Matt Hancock's breach of COVID rules has potentially let him off the hook for abuse of public money. Slowcock and Starmer were commenting on the appointment of Hancock's mistress, Gina Coladangelo, as a non-executive director at the Department of Health and Social Care, paid for by the taxpayer. According to Slowcock, Coladangelo appears to have had no qualifications or experience that made her suitable for the role of advising on health or social care, saying it was like having your mistress mark your homework. Hancock had previously taken his squeeze with him to the recent G7 summit in Cornwall, again at taxpayers' expense. Looks like you and I have been paying for Hancock's sexcapades for the last 6 weeks, which is a pretty horrible thought. Someone not familiar with how the Johnson government works might think that these corrupt payments of a salary and expenses would be a very good reason for Hancock to resign. But of course, Boris Johnson himself has behaved in a very similar fashion in the past. The Jennifer Arcuri scandal, when he was Mayor of London, for example, where the taxpayer was supposedly funding his private IT lessons with Arcuri at her apartment, whereas it's now been established that the pair were having an affair at taxpayers' expense. Also, Johnson had Arcuri accompany him on international jollies, all expenses paid, and awarded the company she owned grants and loans that it subsequently became clear she was not entitled to. OK, he was only London Mayor at the time, but as Prime Minister he was conducting an affair with Carrie Symonds while his wife at the time was undergoing cancer treatment. Such a lovely guy, who wouldn't vote for him? And the word from the Westminster Press Corps is that Symonds is basically running Downing Street in much the same way that Dominic Cummings used to. Who appointed her to that position of power, and what are her qualifications and experience for that role? With these parallels, you can see why Johnson couldn't possibly fire Hancock for his taxpayer-funded infidelities and corrupt payments. Otherwise, Johnson would have had to go too. But surely, you might be thinking, if we believe Dominic Cummings, there were 15 to 20 other reasons why Hancock should and could have been fired, including sending hospital patients back into care homes without being tested for COVID-19 while lying about it, for blaming PPE shortages on the NHS chief Simon Stevens and the Treasury, when it was his own incompetence awarding dodgy contracts to cronies, donors and associates with no previous experience or knowledge of providing PPE. Those pals of Hancock had to source substandard equipment from China, which led to long delays, whilst experienced British suppliers were ignored when they were offering better, quicker and cheaper PPE supplies. But unfortunately for them, they weren't mates of Hancock, or Tory donors for that matter. So why wasn't Hancock sacked for these or any of the other reasons Cummings gave? Well, each one would have reflected badly on Johnson himself. After all, he's meant to be Hancock's boss. Of course, he was off on holiday, stroke honeymoon, stroke recovering from COVID, which he probably idiotically caught shaking hands with COVID patients. So a lot of the dismissible offences were committed precisely because Johnson was not around to supervise Hancock. But still, a sacking for any of those reasons would have meant that Johnson's lack of judgment, or lack of attention, would have been in the spotlight. And of course, there's another reason. At least 10 of the current cabinet have breached the ministerial code. See our previous video giving full details of those breaches. And if you're going to sack Hancock, then it's possible that the whole house of cards would fall. Like a game of ministerial Jenga. Fire Hancock, and what reason would you have not to sack the bullying, treasonous Priti Patel, or the corrupt cesspit Jenrick, or the judiciary-ignoring, law-breaking Gove or Truss? No, Johnson had to find a way of having Matt Hancock resign, rather than be fired, in order to avoid a collapse of his cabinet. But it couldn't be a resignation for an offence that Johnson was guilty of too. Tricky. And then I saw former Labour Cabinet Minister Alan Johnson being interviewed on Sky News, and he mentioned that there had never been cameras in ministers' offices during his time in the Blair and Brown governments. He served in 5 different departments, including as Health Secretary, and was certain this was the case. Tory Rory Stewart tweeted that this was also true during his time as International Development Secretary in 2019. Definitely no cameras. So why was there a camera in Matt Hancock's offices? Who put it there? And who leaked the footage? It sounds to me like a setup, but Downing Street is refusing to comment on suggestions that this camera would have had to have been sanctioned by Johnson himself. No one seems to know who put it there, for what reason, or who leaked the footage. My theory is that Johnson, or his advisers, knew about Hancock's 6-week affair with Gina Coladangelo, and that he arranged to have that CCTV camera installed for the express purpose of capturing footage such as this and then having it leaked anonymously. The fact he appeared to be standing by Hancock and refusing to call for his dismissal is neither here nor there. Johnson is dishonest about everything, and this support was probably just another lie and obfuscation. Every aspect of Hancock's departure seems to have been carefully choreographed so as to avoid any possible ramification for Johnson's premiership.